I spent 3 years trying to prove something impossible. Not difficult. Impossible. My colleagues thought I'd lost my mind. Perhaps they were right. I was searching for a pattern that could fill infinite space without ever creating the same arrangement twice. Most mathematicians said it couldn't exist. That infinity demands repetition. That chaos and order can't coexist in the same structure. But I couldn't let it go, because I saw myself in that problem, a mind that couldn't fit into the repeating patterns society demanded. A person who worked differently, loved differently, thought differently. And the day I found it, the aperiodic tile, I wept. Not because I'd solved a puzzle, but because I'd proven that something could be perfectly ordered without ever conforming. That non-repetition isn't chaos. It's another kind of perfection. Let me tell you why this matters to you, right now, today. You've been measuring your life against patterns that repeat, cycles of productivity that you're supposed to maintain week after week, relationship templates that are supposed to follow predictable arcs, career paths that loop through familiar stages, entry-level, middle management, expertise, retirement. When you don't fit these cycles, when your Mondays don't look like everyone else's Mondays, when your growth doesn't follow a predictable rhythm that rises and falls and rises again in neat waves, you think something's wrong with you. You think you're chaotic, inconsistent, broken, unable to maintain momentum, unable to be the reliable, steady person that the world rewards. But here's what I need you to understand, and I mean really understand, deep in your bones. We've confused order with repetition. We think that anything meaningful must cycle back, must be reproducible, must fit a template we've seen before. If it doesn't repeat, we call it random. If it doesn't fit the pattern, we call it chaos. But the deepest mathematics of the universe proves otherwise. There exists a category of perfect order that never repeats, aperiodic patterns, and they're everywhere in nature, everywhere in consciousness, everywhere in the structure of meaning itself. Your inability to fit repeating patterns isn't a flaw, it's evidence that you're operating at a different level of complexity. You're not chaotic, you're aperiodic. What I'm going to give you in the next 40 minutes is emotional permission to stop forcing yourself into cycles that don't fit your nature. I'm going to show you a mathematical framework that validates nonlinear growth, that explains how determination and novelty coexist, that proves you can follow your nature with absolute consistency and still never repeat yourself. I'm going to offer you practical tools for navigating life as an aperiodic pattern. And most importantly, I'm going to give you relief from the shame of not being consistent in the way everyone told you consistency should look, because the most profound structures in mathematics, in nature, and in human consciousness are non-repeating. Repetition isn't the gold standard of order. It's just the easiest kind to recognize. You're not failing at consistency. You're succeeding at complexity. Let me take you back to 1936. I became obsessed with wallpaper. Not the decorative kind you'd see in a Victorian parlor, but the mathematical kind. The question was deceptively simple, the way the most dangerous questions always are. If you have an infinite wall, and you want to cover it with copies of a single tile shape, will you inevitably create a repeating pattern? Everyone assumed yes. Intuitively, it makes perfect sense. If you're using the same shape over and over and over again, extending outward in every direction forever, eventually you'd see the same arrangement twice. It's like shuffling a deck of cards infinitely. Patterns must recur. The universe must run out of novelty. There are only so many ways to arrange things, and infinity would exhaust them all and start repeating. But I couldn't prove it. And what you can't prove might not be true. I spent months filling notebooks with tiles, hexagons that fit together like honeycombs, triangles that locked into each other with geometric precision. Strange polygons, I invented shapes that had never existed before except in my imagination, each one a test case, each one a possibility. I would cover page after page, extending the pattern as far as the paper allowed, searching for the moment when it would loop back, when I'd see the same configuration again. My colleagues at Cambridge thought I was avoiding real work. Perhaps I was. There was a war coming. Everyone could feel it like a storm on the horizon, and here I was, drawing tiles like a child with a coloring book. But this problem haunted me because it wasn't really about tiles. It was never about tiles, it was about whether the universe allows for true novelty within strict rules. Could something be completely determined, every tile placement following logically, mathematically, inevitably from the last, yet never fall into repetition? Could you be entirely yourself following your deepest nature, without ever becoming a cycle that just spins in place? I was asking, is there a mathematics of being yourself without repeating yourself? The day I found the first aperiodic tiling, I was so exhausted I nearly missed it. I'd been working for 16 hours straight, my hand cramping from drawing, my eyes burning from staring at patterns until they seemed to move on the page. The pattern emerged slowly, tile by tile, each one forced into its position by the tiles around it. And then I saw it. I really saw it. This pattern would grow forever, each section determined by the last, following absolute mathematical rules, but it would never, ever repeat. Not in a million tiles, not in a billion, not in infinity. I remember standing at my window that night, looking out at the lights of Cambridge, each window glowing in the darkness, and realizing that every window was aperiodic. Every life behind those windows, every mind, every story. We've been taught that consistency means sameness, that being reliable means being predictable in a repeating way. But that's not what mathematics says. Mathematics says you can be perfectly consistent in your rules and still create infinite novelty. You can be absolutely determined by your nature and still surprise yourself every single day. I stood there and cried, not the gentle tears of happiness, but the deep shaking sobs of someone who's been holding something in for too long. Because I'd just proven that I wasn't broken, that the way my mind worked, always moving, always finding new connections, never settling into comfortable routines, wasn't a flaw in my character. It was a different kind of order, an aperiodic order. But what does a mathematical tile have to do with your life? Everything, it turns out, because you are placing tiles every single day. Let me tell you about Enigma. When I was recruited to Bletchley Park to break the German code during the war, everyone focused on the machine's complexity, the rotors, the plug board, the sheer number of possible settings, 150 million combinations. But the real problem was more subtle, more maddening. The Germans kept changing the patterns, not randomly. They followed rules, strict operational procedures. But the rules created variations that never quite repeated. The temptation, the overwhelming temptation, was to look for cycles, to assume that if we gathered enough intercepted messages, if we worked long enough and hard enough, we'd see the same sequence twice. We'd catch them repeating themselves. That's what the previous codebreakers had tried. Brilliant people, dedicated people, people who worked until their minds broke from exhaustion. They failed because they were looking for repetition in a non-repeating system. I would lie awake at night in my small room at Bletchley, listening to the sounds of other code breakers still working, still searching, and I'd think about those tiles, about patterns that never repeat, about order that doesn't cycle. The breakthrough came when I stopped looking for what repeated and started looking for what related. The patterns weren't cycling, they were evolving. Each message was determined by the previous settings, by the rules the Germans followed, but the settings changed according to aperiodic logic. They were following their nature, their procedures, their training, but they weren't repeating themselves. And I realized, you are your own enigma machine. Your life isn't cycling. It's not supposed to return to the same patterns. You're not meant to get back to who you were 5 years ago. You're not failing because this year doesn't look like last year. You're not broken because you can't seem to maintain the same energy, the same interests, the same relationships in the same way year after year. You're aperiodic. Every decision you make is determined by who you've been, by every experience you've had, by the tiles you've already placed. but it doesn't mean you'll ever be that person again. You're evolving according to rules, your values, your nature, your mathematical self, but those rules don't create loops, they create spirals. They create growth, they create something that keeps unfolding into new territories. The people who hurt you most are often those who expect you to be periodic, to return to familiar states, to cycle back to the person they first met. They say things like, "You've changed," and they mean it as an accusation. They want you to be predictable in the way a clock is predictable, the way the seasons are predictable, the way anything safe and comfortable is predictable. But that's not how consciousness works. That's not how growth works. That's not how being alive works. I learned this the hard way, painfully, over years. I spent so much of my life trying to be the person others expected, the predictable colleague who showed up at the same time every day with the same demeanor, the conventional thinker who would nod along with established wisdom, the man who would cycle through acceptable versions of masculinity and normalcy, who would date the right women, marry, settle into a pattern that everyone could recognize and approve of. I tried to make my inner life periodic. I tried to smooth my strangeness into repeating acceptable patterns. I tried to be the same person at work and at home, in public and in private, in spring and in winter. It nearly destroyed me. The relief, the incredible, almost painful relief, came when I accepted I am an aperiodic tiling. I follow my rules absolutely. My love of truth, my fascination with patterns, my need to understand how things really work. But I will never repeat myself. Each day is a new tile, determined by all the tiles before it, but never the same tile twice, and neither will you. Now, let me break this down, because this is where it gets interesting, where the mathematics starts to change how you see everything. Here's what breaks most people's brains, what creates this cognitive dissonance that they can't quite resolve. Something can be completely determined and still never repeat. These two things seem contradictory. We think determined means mechanical, predictable, like a train on a track that just goes around and around. And we think novelty means random, chaotic, like dice being thrown. But when I place an aperiodic tile, the next tile's position is forced. There's only one place it can go. If I've placed the first 100 tiles correctly, the 101st tile has exactly one position that works. The pattern is deterministic. It follows absolute rules. No randomness, no choice, in a sense. But despite this total determination, the overall pattern never cycles back to a previous state. Watch this carefully, because this destroys the false choice we've been given our entire lives. Either you're free, random, chaotic, able to do anything, or you're determined, mechanical, repetitive, just going through the motions. Either you're a wild river with no banks, or you're a machine stamping out the same product over and over. But aperiodic systems prove there's a third option, a beautiful third option that nobody told you about. Determined novelty. You are shaped by your past, absolutely, completely, mathematically. Your psychology, the wounds you carry, the joys that formed you, the losses that changed you, they determine your responses. You're not random. When something happens to you, you don't respond in just any old way. You respond in your way, the way that follows from who you are. You're not free in the sense of being disconnected from causality, floating above your history. But determined doesn't mean repetitive. You can follow your nature with perfect consistency and still never return to the same state twice. Every response you make is caused by who you are, but who you are is changing with each tile you place. Each experience slightly alters the rules, or rather, reveals new aspects of the rules you've always been following. This is why therapy based on breaking cycles often fails, why people spend years trying to break patterns and then feel like failures when the patterns return. You're not in a cycle. You're in a determined evolution that looks like a cycle if you don't zoom out far enough. Imagine you're looking at my aperiodic tiling, but you can only see a small section, maybe 10 tiles by 10 tiles. You might notice that certain configurations appear multiple times in that small window. You might think, Aha! It's repeating. But if you could zoom out, if you could see 1,000 tiles by 1,000 tiles, you'd realize those similar configurations are embedded in entirely different larger contexts. They're not repetitions. They're variations on a theme within a non-repeating whole. That's your life. That's your relationships. That's your career. You think you're in the same argument again, the same career frustration again. But you're not. You're in a similar configuration embedded in a completely different context, because you've placed 10,000 tiles since the last time, and even if 2 tiles look similar, they're not in the same pattern anymore. The real work isn't breaking the pattern. Breaking the pattern is like trying to break an aperiodic tiling. You can't break what isn't cyclic. The real work is understanding that your pattern doesn't repeat and learning to trust its aperiodic unfolding. Learning to recognize that what looks like the same problem is actually a new tile that happens to have some similar features to an old tile. But it's being placed in a completely different position in your life's overall pattern. You're not stuck in a loop. You've never been stuck in a loop. You're in a non-repeating pattern that you mistake for a cycle because you're too close to see its true structure. Step back, zoom out, look at the last 5 years of your life, not the last 5 days. Do you see the same exact pattern? Or do you see themes that evolve, problems that transform, growth that spirals upward even when it feels like you're going in circles? Let me give you another principle, another way this works. In an aperiodic tiling, each tile follows simple local rules: how it connects to its neighbors, what angles are allowed, which edges can touch. These rules are simple. A child could understand them. Place edge A against edge B. Don't place edge C against edge D. Simple. But these simple local rules create global patterns that no one could predict by looking at a single tile. The overall structure that emerges over hundreds or thousands of tiles is far more complex, far more interesting, far more beautiful than the simple rules would suggest. This is exactly how your life works. Your daily decisions are local rules. How you respond to stress. Do you reach out or withdraw? How you connect with people. Do you lead with vulnerability or with strength? What you do when you're afraid. Do you push through or do you pause and reflect? These seem small, personal, limited. Just simple rules about how you operate. But over time, over months and years and decades, these local rules create a global pattern in your life that is far more interesting, far more complex than the simple rules would suggest. You can't predict the global pattern by analyzing your local rules. You have to live them and let the pattern emerge. You have to place the tiles day after day following your simple rules, and then one day you turn around and look at what you've created, and you're astonished. You couldn't have planned this. You couldn't have designed this, but it's yours. It's coherent. It's beautiful in its complexity. This is why planning your whole life doesn't work. Why vision boards and 5-year plans often feel hollow. Why they seem exciting when you make them, but then they just sit in a drawer gathering dust. You're trying to dictate the global pattern. You're trying to skip ahead and say, this is what the overall structure will look like, but the global pattern emerges from local rules faithfully followed. You can't impose it from the outside. The question isn't, what do I want my life to look like in 10 years? That's the wrong question. It's tempting, because it feels productive. It feels like taking control. But it's asking you to predict an aperiodic system, and aperiodic systems can't be predicted. They can only be recognized as they unfold. The right question is, what are my local rules? What do I do when I'm afraid? How do I treat people who disagree with me? What do I create when no one's watching? What do I value more than comfort? What am I unwilling to compromise on? Follow those rules with absolute consistency, with the kind of rigor you'd apply to a mathematical proof. And a pattern will emerge that you could never have designed. It will be yours, it will be coherent, it will be recognizably you, and it will never repeat. I see this in my own life so clearly now, looking back. My local rule was always, pursue truth regardless of where it leads. That was it. Simple. A child could understand it. When I encountered a question, I followed it. When I found something that didn't make sense, I investigated. When the accepted answer felt wrong, I challenged it. I didn't know that rule would lead me to mathematics, then to philosophy, then to the foundations of computation, then to code breaking, then to artificial intelligence, then to morphogenesis and biology. I couldn't have planned that trajectory. If you'd asked me at 20 what I'd be working on at 40, I would have been completely wrong. But the global pattern emerged from that simple local rule: pursue truth. And the pattern is coherent even though it's non-repeating. Each field I entered was different from the last. Each question was new. Each tile was unique. But they all follow from the same rule, and together they create something that I could never have designed, but that is absolutely, unmistakably mine. Stop trying to control the global pattern. You can't. It's too complex, too emergent, too dependent on factors you can't see yet. Perfect your local rules and trust the emergence. That's the work. That's the only work. Now, here's the lie that imprisons people, the lie I need you to see clearly so you can step out of its shadow. If it doesn't repeat, it's chaos. This is the false dichotomy we're given. Either it's orderly, which means regular, predictable, repeating, or it's chaotic, which means random, meaningless, broken. But aperiodic patterns are perfectly ordered. They're more complex than periodic patterns, yes. They require more information to describe. They unfold in ways that surprise you. But they're not disordered. They're not random. They're not chaos. When your life doesn't look like it did last year, that's not chaos. When your relationships don't follow the same script as everyone else's relationships, that's not instability. When your work evolves into something unrecognizable from where it started, that's not failure to maintain focus. That's aperiodic order. That's complexity. That's the natural structure of living systems. The problem is that we've only been taught to recognize one kind of order: repetition. Same time every day. Wake up at 6, coffee at 6:15, work at 7, lunch at noon. Same structure every week. Monday meetings, Wednesday reviews, Friday wrap-ups. Same goals every year, New Year's resolutions that are basically the same as last year's resolutions, just reworded slightly. But the universe runs on aperiodic order. Galaxies don't repeat their formations. Each galaxy is unique, follows the same laws of physics as every other galaxy, but no two have the same structure. Coastlines don't cycle through the same shapes. Every coastline on Earth is different, follows the same geological principles, but each one is an unrepeatable pattern created by the specific history of that piece of land. Your heartbeat, healthy hearts are aperiodic. Did you know that? A perfectly regular heartbeat, like a metronome, is actually a sign of cardiac disease. Healthy hearts vary their rhythm slightly with each beat, responding to respiration, to nervous system fluctuations, to the complex needs of the body. The variation isn't random. It's ordered, but it's not repetitive. Repetition is often a sign of death, not life. Machines repeat. Causes are static, but living systems are aperiodic. They're ordered, but they're responsive, adaptive, evolving. They follow rules, but the rules generate novelty. When you try to make your life periodic, same routine every day regardless of how you feel, same goals every year regardless of how you've grown, same version of yourself year after year regardless of what you've experienced, you're not creating order. You're creating rigidity. You're trying to make yourself into a machine, into something dead. True order allows for variation within structure. True order is aperiodic. Your life isn't falling apart because it's changing. It's coming together in a pattern more sophisticated than repetition. Can you feel the difference? Can you feel the relief in that reframe? You're not broken because you can't maintain the same routine. You're complex because you respond to your actual needs instead of forcing yourself into arbitrary cycles. You're not inconsistent because your interests evolve. You're growing because your local rules are generating new applications, new expressions, new tiles. You're not lost because you can't figure out the overall pattern. You're trusting emergence because you understand that aperiodic patterns can't be predicted, only recognized as they unfold. Now, here's something that might unsettle you, or it might liberate you depending on how you hold it. In aperiodic tilings, once you place the first tile, the entire infinite pattern is determined. Every single tile that will ever be placed is already decided by that first placement and the rules of how tiles connect. But you can't see that determination. You can't look at the first tile and know what the millionth tile will look like. You have to discover it, one tile at a time, placing each one in the only position it can go, watching the pattern unfold. This is the paradox of your life, and it's a paradox worth sitting with. Your childhood, your first relationships, your early wounds and joys, the first tile, these are your first tiles. They determine everything that follows. Not in the sense that they trap you, but in the sense that they set the rules for how your pattern unfolds, the way you were loved or not loved, the first time you felt truly seen or truly abandoned. The early experiences that taught you how the world works, these are foundational tiles, and they determine the structure of everything that comes after. But here's what's beautiful, what's almost heartbreakingly beautiful. Determination isn't imprisonment. The pattern is set, yes, but the pattern is infinite. It will never exhaust itself. It will never become boring. It will never stop surprising you. People talk about escaping your past or overcoming your childhood, like your early life is a cage you need to break out of. But that's not how aperiodic systems work. You don't escape your first tiles. They're the foundation. They're what makes the pattern yours and not someone else's. If I had different childhood experiences, different early tiles, I would be a completely different aperiodic pattern. Not better, not worse, just different. The pattern I am is determined by where I started, and that's not a limitation. It's an identity. It's what makes me me. The work is not to escape your first tiles. The work is to understand the rules they created and then trust those rules to generate something beautiful. Your trauma isn't a cycle to break. It's a set of rules that, if understood, will generate a pattern of healing that never stops unfolding. Every time you encounter something that echoes that original wound, you're not repeating the trauma, you're placing a new tile that's informed by the trauma but isn't the trauma itself. And each new tile is a chance to see the rule more clearly, to work with it more consciously, to generate healing instead of harm. Your gifts aren't traits to maximize or skills to monetize. They're initial conditions that will express themselves in infinite variations throughout your life. If you were curious as a child, that curiosity is a foundational tile, and it will generate new expressions decade after decade, different questions, different fields, different applications, but always recognizably that same curiosity. You can't escape your beginning, but your beginning doesn't trap you. It launches you into an infinite, non-repeating pattern that is entirely yours. Let me tell you something else. Something that might seem pessimistic at first, but is actually liberating. Aperiodic patterns have no end. They tile infinitely, which means there's no completion, no final state, no moment when the pattern is done. This is either terrifying or liberating, depending on how you see it. Western culture is obsessed with completion, finishing, arriving, being done. We want to be done with therapy, done with learning, done with growing. We want to find our final self, our true self, the complete version of who we're supposed to be, and then just live as that person for the rest of our lives. But aperiodic mathematics says there is no final self. You are always in the middle, always placing the next tile. The pattern is always incomplete, because it's infinite. This doesn't mean you never progress, you absolutely do. Each tile adds to the pattern. The pattern becomes richer, more complex, more interesting. You're not static, but there's no moment when you step back and say, "There, I'm finished being me. I've become the complete version of myself. Now I can just repeat this forever." The people who suffer most are those waiting to be complete, waiting to arrive at the life they're supposed to have, waiting to become the final version of themselves so they can finally relax, finally stop growing, finally just be. But you'll never arrive. And that's not sad. That's the structure of consciousness. That's what it means to be alive. You're always in the infinite middle, always becoming, always placing the next tile that's determined by all previous tiles but has never been placed before. Can you make peace with that? Can you find freedom in it? I'll be honest with you. This was hard for me to accept. I wanted to arrive. I wanted to solve the final problem, prove the ultimate theorem, understand the complete system. I wanted to reach a point where I could say, there, I understand how everything works. Now I can rest. But every answer generated new questions. Every proof revealed new mysteries. Every system I understood showed me larger systems I didn't understand yet. And eventually, I realized this is the point. The point isn't to arrive. The point is to keep placing tiles. The point is to stay in the infinite middle, always becoming, always discovering, always unfolding. You're already complete at every moment, and you'll never be done. Both are true. Live in that paradox. Now let me give you something practical, something you can actually use. You can't predict an aperiodic pattern by looking at its rules. You can only recognize it as it unfolds. This changes everything about how you make decisions, how you plan your life, how you think about your future. You're not trying to predict who you'll be in 5 years. You can't. You don't have enough information. The tiles you'll place between now and then will create context you can't anticipate. Experiences you can't foresee will add to your pattern in ways that change everything. Instead, you're trying to recognize who you're becoming as it happens. You're trying to see the pattern that's already emerging right now in the tiles you're currently placing. You're not trying to predict what your relationships will look like. How could you? The other person is an aperiodic pattern too, placing their own tiles, following their own rules, evolving in ways neither of you can foresee. Instead, you're trying to recognize the pattern your relationship is creating as it evolves. What are the local rules you're both following? What global pattern is emerging from those rules? Is it a pattern you want to continue? Are there rules you need to change? The skill is not forecasting, the skill is pattern recognition in real time. This means you need to pay attention differently. Not, what do I want to happen, but what is already happening. What pattern is emerging? What tile is trying to be placed next? Most anxiety comes from trying to predict aperiodic systems. You're applying periodic thinking. It will cycle back. I know what comes next. I can control the outcome to aperiodic reality. It won't repeat. I can't know what comes next. I can only influence it by following my rules. The relief comes when you shift from prediction to recognition. I don't know what my career will look like in 5 years, but I can recognize what tile wants to be placed next. I can see that right now, in this moment, the next tile is learning this new skill, or having this difficult conversation, or taking this small risk. I can't see the 100th tile from here, but I can see the next tile. I don't know if this relationship will last forever, but I can recognize the pattern we're creating right now. I can see whether our local rules are compatible, whether the pattern we're generating together is one I want to continue, whether the next tile that wants to be placed is deeper intimacy or honest distance. I don't know who I'll become, but I can recognize who I'm being today. I can see my local rules in action. I can notice the pattern I'm creating. I can adjust my rules if the pattern isn't what I want. You're not supposed to know the future. You're supposed to recognize the present so clearly that the next tile becomes obvious. Let me give you some practices now, some actual things you can do, because wisdom without application is just entertainment. Every morning, ask yourself, what tile am I placing today? Not what's my routine, not what's on my calendar, not what am I supposed to do, but what single tile, if placed today, would continue the pattern I'm becoming. This isn't about productivity. It's about coherence. It's about whether the tile you place today follows from your local rules or contradicts them. Some days the tile is rest. Your rule might be, I honor my body's needs, And today your body needs rest, so rest is the tile. It doesn't look like yesterday's tile, which might have been intense work, but it follows the same rule. Some days the tile is confrontation. Your rule might be, I speak truth even when it's uncomfortable. And today, there's a truth that needs to be spoken, so confrontation is the tile. Some days the tile is creation, some days it's connection. Some days it's solitude. The tiles are all different, but they're all part of the same non-repeating pattern if they follow your rules. Write it down, one sentence. Today's tile is blank. Then place it. Do the thing. Be the person. Make the choice. At the end of the day, ask, did I place the tile or did I try to repeat yesterday's tile? Repetition feels safe. It feels like you're being consistent, being reliable. But if the tile that needed to be placed today was different from yesterday's tile, then repeating yesterday's tile actually breaks the pattern. It introduces actual chaos, forcing a periodic structure onto an aperiodic system. Novelty feels risky. It feels like you're being inconsistent, being unpredictable. But if the tile that wants to be placed today is different from yesterday's tile, then placing that new tile maintains coherence. It allows the pattern to continue unfolding according to its own mathematics. You're not trying to be consistent in the old way, the way you were taught. Same every day, predictable every day, repeating every day. You're trying to be consistent in the aperiodic way, true to the unfolding pattern, responsive to what the pattern needs next, faithful to your local rules even when they generate novel tiles. Once a week, sit down with your journal and look back at your tiles. Not to judge them, not to critique yourself for the tiles you didn't place or the times you repeated when you should have innovated, just to recognize the pattern. Write this question at the top of the page. What pattern am I seeing? What am I becoming? You're not looking for cycles. You're not looking for, oh, I do the same thing every Monday. You're looking for coherence within variation. You're looking for the way different tiles follow the same rules. Maybe you see a pattern of increasing honesty, even though each instance looked different. Last week, you were honest with a friend about their behavior. This week, you are honest with yourself about your career. Two different contexts, two different tiles, but the same rule generating both. I speak truth. Maybe you see a pattern of choosing connection over comfort, even though the connections were with different people in different contexts. One day, you reached out to someone new. Another day, you stayed in a difficult conversation instead of leaving. Different tiles, same rule. I move toward relationship even when it's scary. Maybe you see a pattern of courage that expressed itself differently each time but followed the same internal rule. You can't repeat courage. What's courageous today is different from what was courageous last month, but you can follow the rule, I do the hard thing, and generate infinite variations of courage. This is a periodic recognition, seeing the sameness in the differences, seeing the consistent rule generating infinite variations. Don't force it. If you don't see a pattern yet, that's fine. You might be too close. Aperiodic patterns often require distance to become visible. Come back next week. Keep placing tiles. The pattern will reveal itself when you have enough tiles to see it. Here's another practice. Identify your 3 core local rules, the simple principles that govern your immediate choices. These aren't goals. Goals are outcomes. I want to be successful. I want to be happy. I want to be loved. Those are endpoints you're trying to reach. Local rules are processes, how you operate, how you make decisions, how you respond to situations. Examples of local rules: I speak honestly even when it's uncomfortable. I move toward curiosity rather than away from fear. I protect my creative time. I choose people who choose me. I do the next right thing without worrying about the 10th right thing. Write down 3 rules that you think govern your behavior. Then test them. Is this actually how I operate or how I wish I operated? Be honest. Your real local rules might be, I avoid conflict at all costs. I seek approval before I seek truth. I prioritize others' comfort over my own needs. I stay busy so I don't have to feel. No judgment, just recognition. You can't change rules you haven't acknowledged. Then ask yourself this crucial question. If I follow these rules for the next 10 years, what global pattern will emerge? If your rule is, I avoid conflict, and you follow that rule consistently for 10 years, what will your life look like? What relationships will you have? What problems will remain unsolved? What version of yourself will you become? If your rule is, I speak honestly even when it's uncomfortable, and you follow that rule consistently for 10 years, what global pattern emerges? Different relationships, different problems, different version of yourself. Neither is right or wrong in some abstract moral sense, but one might create a pattern you want to live in, and one might not. If you don't like the pattern your current rules are generating, you can change your rules, but you have to know what they are first. You can't change what you can't see, and here's the beautiful part. You don't have to control the whole pattern. You just have to choose your local rules and trust the emergence. The global pattern will take care of itself. Complexity will emerge from simplicity. Beauty will emerge from consistency. Now, write this down and keep it somewhere visible, on your mirror, on your desk, in your phone. Somewhere you'll see it when you need it. I am not meant to repeat myself. My growth is aperiodic. If this year doesn't look like last year, I'm not failing. I'm evolving. If I can't return to who I was, I'm not broken. I'm unfolding. I follow my rules with perfect consistency, and those rules generate infinite novelty. I am determined and surprising. I am ordered and unexpected. I am aperiodic. Read it when you're judging yourself for changing, when you're confused because you can't get back to a previous version of yourself, when someone criticizes you for not being who they expected, when you feel like you're failing because you're not maintaining the same interests, the same energy, the same approach, year after year. You're not a cycle, you're a non-repeating pattern of perfect coherence. You have permission. You have mathematical, provable, undeniable permission to never be the same twice while remaining entirely yourself. Let me bring this home now. Let me tell you what this all means, why it matters, why I spent 40 minutes of your life on tiles and patterns and mathematics. When I discovered the aperiodic tile, when I held that proof in my hands, I didn't just solve a mathematical problem. I found permission to be myself. I had spent so much of my life trying to fit into repeating patterns, trying to be the predictable colleague who showed up the same way every day, trying to be the conventional thinker who would cycle through established ideas without disrupting them, trying to be the man who would repeat acceptable versions of masculinity and normalcy, who would date the right women, marry at the right time, settle into a pattern that everyone could recognize and approve of. It was killing me. Slowly, invisibly, it was erasing who I actually was. The mathematics showed me another way. You can follow absolute rules, be completely determined by your nature, and still never repeat. You can be perfectly ordered and endlessly surprising. You can be entirely yourself and completely unpredictable. You are an aperiodic pattern. Your life doesn't repeat. Your relationships don't cycle. Your growth doesn't loop back. And that's not chaos. That's complexity. That's the natural mathematics of consciousness. That's what it means to be alive. If you came here thinking you were broken because you can't maintain consistency in the old way, I hope you leave knowing you're not failing at being periodic. You're succeeding at being aperiodic. If you came here exhausted from trying to return to previous versions of yourself, trying to get back to who you were before the loss, before the change, before the thing that shifted everything, I hope you leave with permission. You can't go back. You're not meant to. The pattern only moves forward, tile by tile, into infinite novelty. And that's not a loss. That's life. If you came here confused about why your life doesn't look like anyone else's, why you can't seem to follow the templates everyone else follows, why the paths that work for other people feel wrong for you, I hope you leave understanding. Your pattern follows different rules. Not wrong rules, not broken rules. Let me give you one more thing. A mantra. something you can come back to when the world is telling you to repeat, to conform, to cycle back to something safe and familiar. You are not broken. You are not chaotic. You are not inconsistent. You are an aperiodic pattern, perfectly ordered, endlessly evolving, incapable of repetition. Your nature determines you completely, and your nature generates infinite surprise. Place the next tile. Trust the pattern. Stop trying to repeat. If this perspective shifted something for you, if it gave you permission you didn't know you needed, if it helped you see your life differently, I'd be grateful if you'd let me know in the comments below. Tell me, what's the tile you're placing today? What's the pattern you're recognizing? What's the rule you're following? I read every comment, not out of obligation, but because I'm genuinely curious about the patterns other people are discovering. Each of you is an aperiodic pattern I've never seen before and will never see again. That's not emptiness. That's the mathematics of meaning. And if you want more perspectives that challenge conventional patterns, that question the repeating cycles we're told to accept, that explore the mathematics of being human, subscribe to this channel. I can't promise the next video will repeat this one's structure. I can't promise it'll even be about mathematics. But I can promise it will follow the same rule. Truth over comfort, complexity over simplicity, aperiodic thinking over periodic habits. Thank you for trusting me with your time. Thank you for being willing to see patterns differently. Thank you for being an aperiodic pattern in a world that keeps demanding cycles. Now go place your tile, the one that wants to be placed today, the one that follows your rules but has never been placed before, the one that continues your pattern into new territory. The pattern is waiting to emerge, and it's going to be beautiful, not because it's perfect, but because it's yours. And it's never been done before, and it never will be again. That's not chaos, that's you.